Silver threads and... No, that isn't the one. Eventually, I'm going to find what I'm looking for here. The Memphis Blues. I know it's here somewhere among all these old recordings, but... Oh, say, looky here. One of those old-time 6-disc records. 1913. You know, an interesting thing. People had to play these on their own home phonographs in those days. You know, the gramophone with a long Morning Glory bell on it. Didn't have disc jockey shows on the radio like we have today. Those were the days of headphones and crystal sets. Radio was really a novelty. It was used mostly by the Navy for ship-to-shore communication. In fact, it was through radio that we first heard about the sinking of the Titanic when it hit an iceberg in 1912. Oh, say, it's lucky you came in when you did. I'm anxious to find the Memphis Blues record, because it shows one of the big changes that was happening in American music right about there, 1909 to 1913. Of course, there were a lot of things happening in America. Most of them were being reflected in the arts. But the country was in a state of agitation and unrest, and so was the arts. So we'll talk about that a little later. Hey, I want to show you something. After lecturing to my 10 o'clock class, I stopped in at the college pharmacy to pick up a prescription, and I'll show you what I found. Mortar and pestle. Oh, yes, and I have some prints of some famous paintings I want to show you. And let's see, and a fireman's hat. And I have some films spliced together to show you what the movies were doing in those days. I'm going to show to my class. You see, America was surging ahead. Progress and the desire for better conditions were in the air. And that's why this mortar and pestle are so exciting to me. They represent and symbolize the progress we were making in medical science. For instance, Dr. Walter Reed's discovery down in the Panama Canal Zone that the disease of yellow fever was being carried by a mosquito. So, check the mosquito and control the disease. Great strides were also being made in their attitude toward mental illness. Pretty soon vitamins would be making their way into our diet. Yes, new ways to make us live longer were being discovered, and were changing the work of the old-time druggists. He broke down the compounds for these formulas in one of these. And just like all of American society of the day, he was in quite a stir. Looks quite different from our present-day drugstores, doesn't it? In those days, the shelves held drugs and medicines. There were a lot of patent medicines being sold, which they say would cure anything from sprained eyebrows to falling arches. And the candy in the glass jar on the counter always sold well. The kids could usually count on a treat when mother or father went to the apothecary. Well, now for item number 2. I'll model it for you. Now, if I was really wearing it on a job, I would be flippity-clopping down the street in one of these old fire wagons with the smoke belching out of the top of it, 1910 deal. Come on, Napoleon, we've got to save the pickle factory or there'll be no sauerkraut for Grandma. Oh, those are the days. Well, that gives you an idea of a couple of the old institutions of those days. Now, what was happening in America? What was the life like that her artists were representing? Here, just to make sure that I don't give you the wrong information, I'm going to get a couple of crutches. I think I'll make myself comfortable. My favorite chair. America from 1909 to 1913 wasn't too far different from the America I told you about when we were together before, except that it was more idealistic. The demand for reform, in fact, was becoming a fad, sort of like the latest style. And the word humanitarian was in the air. Everyone from rich to poor was doing something that had something to do with reform. Here, these pictures are loose here. I'd like to show you what. This is William K. Vanderbilt, millionaire philanthropist. And Andrew Carnegie gave $10 million in 1910 to start the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And along with this added idealism, we still had big business expanding. We had a strong feeling of progress and faith in ourselves. Of course, we changed presidents. William Taft had replaced Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson was soon to replace Taft. It was during these years, too, that America was really practicing imperialism. That's a pretty big word. But the easiest way to explain it is to say that when one large, powerful country goes into a weaker country and stays there. Of course, sometimes there was a real desire to help develop the country, or rid it of a dictator. That's how Roosevelt and Wilson described our activities in Central America. And sometimes there was a lot of money to be made, too. Members of the new Progressive Party, calling for reforms of all kinds, labeled our actions as dollar diplomacy, which meant that economic factors were the real reason for our taking an active part in the affairs of foreign countries.
Hi,
Why, hello there. My nephew, Jimmy. Quite a boy. I wonder what he wants this time. Oh, Jimmy. Jimmy.
Boy, Uncle, am I glad to find this. I've been looking all over for it.
Well, why do you keep that stuff stacked in here? I'll bet your room at home is piled to the ceiling, huh?
Well, the ballpark's just across the street, and
Oh, and you can go right from school over there without going home first. Is that it?
Well, I can't pass up a deal like that. I trained myself. What are those books for?
Well, my boy, I'm reading about America in 1910.
Oh, that's history stuff. Really, Uncle Howard, that stuff turns me cold.
Turns you cold.
Yeah, it's square.
Square. Well, now, really, I don't think you're giving it a fair chance. If you really studied it, I'll bet it would be very interesting.
That's your Jimmy? Oh, yes, Esther.
But you haven't been over for a few days. You can stay all afternoon?
Why, no, I was on my way to play ball. Wrong.
Oh.
That's the boy for you. Square, huh? Well, let's see, where were we? Oh, yes, discussing conditions in 1912. No, that was the year when Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, William Taft, and Eugene Debs were all running for the presidency. What a campaign. Here is a picture of Theodore Roosevelt. And here's Eugene Debs. And how they battled. Back and forth, back and forth. But the man who finally came out on top was Woodrow Wilson. Now, Wilson felt that the working man needed a better deal. And his promises to them sounded mighty good. Now, labor was a lot better off than it had been in 1900, of course, but improvement was still slow. And when Wilson established the Department of Labor in 1913, it was after much unrest and striking. Unions were trying to help, of course. The two most important ones were the American Federation of Labor, headed by Samuel Gompers, and the IWW, International Workers of the World. This was a small group with a lot of influence, working especially for the unskilled laborer. It was led by Big Bill Haywood, and he was a colorful revolutionist. Now, the IWW won a lot of gains for labor, but it was done through some mighty bitter and bloody strife. So that, in general, their methods were just too radical for them to survive. For instance, in 1910, the Los Angeles Times, which labor claimed was anti-labor, was bombed by the McNamara brothers, both workers in the IWW. Now, even though Samuel Gompers tried to help them, that's him there in the middle, it took a long time for labor to recover from the bad reaction to this explosion. It killed 20 people. Well, along with the stories of labor unrest, political activities, People read in 1912 about the ship Titanic hitting an iceberg, sinking. Remember I mentioned it a minute ago, but I want to show you here a paper. Getting pretty yellow with age now. Tells all about it. Hundreds die as great ship sinks. The mighty Titanic hit by iceberg goes down with 1,200 souls. Wireless saves lives of many. I was just a little shaver at that time, but I still remember what a terrible thing that was. Well, rumblings were going on in another part of our lives, too. Rumblings which finally led to an explosion in, of all places, the art field. Several artists and sculptors in New York City rallied together in 1913 to exhibit their work. You know, not an established academy would accept this stuff, so they had to exhibit in the Armory. Well, they decided to show not only their own paintings, but to flavor their exhibit a little with some new modern art from abroad. Well, it was this new modern art from abroad that stole the show and created an explosion in the art field as loud as the sinking of the Titanic or the explosion of the Los Angeles Times. You know, the public at first hated and misunderstood this new modern art. But actually, it was the most wholesome thing that could have happened. The Armory show became front-page news. It was something to argue about. Now, how could an art exhibition jolt the public so much? And when I say public, I mean public, from all social levels. The millionaire came, and so did his cook and his chauffeur. Now, if frank and honest pictures of American life, like we talked about last time we were together, could cause a minor upheaval, imagine what something like this would do. This modern work by Marcel Duchamp illustrates a style of painting called Cubism. The title of this one is Nude Descending a Staircase. Remember that most Americans were quite remote from art affairs, and were generally unaware of the experiments going on in European art. Oh, many of the paintings and works of sculpture at the Armory show were more understandable. There were little girls roller skating and women drying their hair, and even one man's imaginative view of the brand new Woolworth building, tallest building in the world at that time. Some reflected modern trends, some painted the American scene, and some were the results of our young artists studying abroad. But all felt that agitation that was in the air in America. Well, that was the Armory show of 1913, which became the most influential art exhibition ever held in America. And today, the shapes and the angles, patterns of modernism are reflected in our automobiles, our airplanes, furniture, even our clothing, and of course, industrial designs of all kinds. Quite a show, wouldn't you say? Well, the display of fireworks in the Armory wasn't the only display during this period of 1909 to 1913. A year before the Armory show, something happened that gave the whole country a whirl. No one knows quite how the explosion started in the music and dance world, but they had a pretty good idea who lit the match to it all. Back in the early 1900s, somewhere down in the deep South. A new way of playing the old music called syncopation began to take shape. The old favorites were sped up and their tempo quickened. And this music became known as ragtime and was played in the honky-tonks and cabarets. Then in 1912 along came Irving Berlin, the man with the match who starts the fire with his Alexander's Ragtime Band. And that song virtually lifted ragtime by its piano strings right up out of the dives to the dances of high society. And soon all America was rocking to the rhythms of ragtime. Well, it didn't take long for the people to find that they could dance to those raggy rhythms as well as sing the song. Imagine how Grandma must have felt when Waltz Me Around Again, Willie and the Merry Widow Waltz were suddenly replaced by these ragtime tunes. See what I mean? These new dances were something to be alarmed about. Well, it was bad enough that the women's skirts were getting shorter, but the idea that they should shimmy and shake was almost too much. And what dances they shook themselves to. Funny, but all the dances were named after animals. There was the foxtrot, and the bunny hug, and the turkey trot, and the grizzly bear, and the chicken scratch, and the camel walk, and so on and on and on. Then, at the bottom of it all, they started to wear hobble skirts. And they were so narrow at the bottom that there wasn't much left to do but kind of shimmy from the ankles and up. Well, that in itself was one reason why many people objected to these new dance steps. So after the craze had been going along for a while, there appeared on the scene a couple named Vernon and Irene Castle. Here I have a picture of them. They were two outstanding dance teachers whose grace and art showed that the new steps could be danced to unobjectionably. And so their turkey trot and their tango started our modern ballroom dancing of today. Of course, ragtime wasn't all that was happening to music then. Well, see, look at this. Here's the Russian ballet star, Pavlova. She made her American debut in 1910. And this is a song Al Jolson made popular. He had to get under. Well, this is the time when those beautiful operettas, oh, see if I can think of some of them. Chocolate Soldier, Naughty Marietta, The Red Mill were all going strong. And, oh yes, I nearly forgot that Memphis Blues record. I want you to hear that. Let's see if we can find it now. Got to be here soon. We canvassed most of them. Let's see. Yes, here it is. The Memphis Blues. It was really the first of the true blues songs, written by William C. Handy. He was an Alabama Negro who managed a minstrel show, too. Then, a little later on, he composed the St. Louis Blues. And from then on, he was the father of the blues. Let's listen to this. Oh, just a minute, dear. No cause for alarm, I assure you. Just trying to get this thing to play the Memphis Blues.
Look at those records. Well, it looks like you've been playing something else.
Well, I was just looking for this one. Wasn't having too much success.
Well, if it isn't the noise of the recordings, it's the projection machine.
Well, I suppose so. Say, I bet you thought I never was going to stop when the Claytons were over the other night.
Well, yes, and I wonder how the Claytons felt. You know, it was rather timely, my bringing the coffee in at 11:30. You must admit that. Well, you'd have gone on the rest of the night with those old-time movies.
Well, probably so. Probably so.
Are you still having difficulty?
Yes, I still want to hear the Memphis Blues. I guess we'll have to let that go till later. You know, they never did hear those parts of the Griffith movie that I wanted to show them.
Oh, well, now, listen, dear, if it pleases you, I'll watch them.
Oh, well, fine.
I don't think I did see the last ones that came in the mail last week anyhow.
Well, you just have a chair there, dear. We'll set up the projector, and we'll have a look at them right now.
What's the name of that picture produced by Griffith?
That was Judith of Bethulia. It's a huge spectacle, and undoubtedly the best constructed movie up to that date.
Well, Griffith was the top producer of his day, wasn't he?
Oh, undoubtedly. But even if he had done nothing more than this, he would still be an outstanding man. You see, he developed the camera techniques that are still used in the movies today. He believed that the camera could be a dramatic tool.
Well, let's see his movie.
Okay. All set. Here we go.
Oh, that must be a Bible story.
Well, it is. In fact, a good many morality dramas were being filmed then. Seems like a lot of the movies were preaching at that time.
Well, if you don't stop talking, I'm going to start preaching.
Well, yes, dear.
Of it. I was just getting interested in the story.
Well, you see, I just have a few parts of the film spliced together to show to my class to illustrate what the movies were doing at that time.
Well, when was it made?
1913. This period between, remember, this period between 1908, 9, and 13, when the movies were really commenting on society. Mm-hmm. They were pointing out moral lessons and exposing corruption and pleading causes.
And shooting Indians.
I take it you're referring to the cowboy western.
Well, yes.
Well, this was the time when they started. But you must remember, this cowboy really typified the American ideal of stalwart virtue. Let's have a look at this.
Oh, that's Bronco Billy.
Yeah, he was a colorful character. He and Tom Mix were quite the rage then.
Honestly, Howard, when did you put that slide in? Your class will certainly get a kick out of that.
Yes, I thought they would. But seriously, Bronco Billy and Crying Babies was a small part of the film world, of course. Those movie makers were exposing wickedness in politics and the labor problem.
Well, with all the strikes around that time, they had plenty to comment on.
Yes, that's true. You know, the producer was usually on the side of the employer.
Oh, he was?
Yes. It seems like the only way they could ever solve their problems was to have the generous boss forgive the lazy and misled worker.
that was quite an issue.
Oh, I'll say it was. Very much of an issue. But you know, movies were taking sides on social issues of the day and being used as propaganda tools. Of course, under those circumstances, sometimes the facts got a little blurry. But they also reflected the progressive spirit of the times in the realistic way that they looked at minority groups.
Must be the postman. I bet he has another package.
Yes. Oh, say, I'll bet I know what it is. I dropped my gasoline flat iron on the tail of Jimmy's new model airplane, and I promised him I'd get him a new one.
Well, I'll go up, dear.
Okay. Oh, Esther, would you bring down a screwdriver?
Yes.
You know, sometimes when Esther comes down, we get to talking. I forget to tell you some of the things I want to talk about. Well, the movies at this time were really commenting on the times, and so had the theater. Now, this was also the time of the beautiful and well-made plays. A man who helped this along was William Vaughn Moody. He'd written a play a couple of years back called The Great Divide, which was a huge success. Now, this was something new for the American theater, you see, the poet coming into the theater. Yes, Moody was a great poet, a very great poet. And the thing I liked best about him was his realism. Probably due to his influence, many of our great poets then started to publish their works. Carl Sandburg and Robert Frost, all writing realistically and ending a pretty sterile period in American poetry. I wish I had time to read you some of it, but maybe next time. Well,
I was right here. It was the postman.
oh, what is it?
Yes, and he says that there's a package for you at the post office.
Oh, good. We'll pick it up tomorrow. Did you bring the screwdriver?
And I do hope you're going to fix that blaring phonograph.
News for you, my wife and helpmeet. We are going to fix this blaring phonograph.
Well, you know I don't know one single thing about these.
Well, we can at least get the Memphis blues out of it, I hope.
The part of Jimmy was played by Tommy Tim.